Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I am Heena Goswami, Editorial Consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. In our ongoing series about AI, to discuss its various aspects and impacts, today we are joined by Aniruddha Majumdar. Mr. Aniruddha, a member of Mumbai-based Nishith Desai Associates, is a graduate from National Law School of India University, Bangalore. His keen interests lie in understanding the intersection of law and technology. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talks, Aniruddha.
Thanks a lot, Tina, and thanks for having me here.
So, as we navigate AI as a technology, are the policymakers aware of AI and its impact on different sectors like healthcare, infrastructure, agriculture, and others? Do you think it is important to understand AI with inputs from people of these sectors to understand the ever evolving landscape of AI and gain a better perspective on governance of AI?
Sure. I think the government generally is quite well aware of what AI is, what kind of potential it has, what kind of risks it poses. And I think that's just evidenced through all the conversations, the statements, all the consultations that they have been having in the past few years. So just to give an example, like there's the meaty AI committee, right? Which is looking at how to leverage AI for various sectors, including agriculture, education, health. There's even transportation, environmental pollution, all of these things. Uh, the report also analyzes the need for human resources in the AI sector. Uh, and then, of course, there's the India AI Committee, right? That's another very interesting body which is looking at uh, AI more from a skilling and IP perspective. Again, it's also reviewing risks like uh, what are the safety risks, what are risks with respect to user harms, bias, and so on and so forth. Uh, Even TRI, for example, had come up with a consultation paper and its recommendations on leveraging AI in AI and big data in the telecom sector. And for example, the TRI took an approach where they felt that a risk-based approach will be more relevant, and there's a need for a specific regulator for AI altogether. So when it comes to all of these knowledge exercises, when it comes to thinking about how to deal with AI, I think the government is generally doing a lot there. The Digital India Act is supposed to have a lot of regulations on emerging tech, including AI. And even with respect to the intermediate rules from 2021, uh, there's news that these will be amended again to ensure that they account for uh, deep fakes, AI bias, and the like. So overall, I think the government is trying to get to know the space better, understand how to regulate it. But at the same time, given how technical the area is, given how fast paced and dynamic the area is, I think it is not possible to regulate AI without those inputs that you mentioned from the industry, from academia, researchers, because it is these people who are actually at the forefront, right? They are dealing with AI on a day in, day out basis. They know what they are trying to build, they know what they're trying to use, they know the commercial benefits, they know even the risks which with what they are creating. And without these inputs, I think if uh, the government would still struggle. And unless and until these inputs are taken, these consultations are held with the industry, with researchers, uh, I don't think AI regulation can truly be effective in that sense.
There's ha- there has been a lot of debate in India regarding regulation of AI, and everybody seems to have different answers. What do you think, what in your opinion should be the approach towards regulating AI? Because it's still an evolving technology. So should state intervene at this point, or should self-regulation be the way?
So I think the government is very clear that there will be regulations for AI. It's not that the that AI will be like the Wild West and only market forces will determine what to do. But then governments always have this challenge whenever it comes to any emerging technology about when to regulate. So there are times, and usually the government is always playing catch up. Regulations are playing catch up already when a technology or when an issue has been identified. It sometimes takes 5 years, 10 years to finally come up with even the most basic of regulations, right? And we've seen that even with the DPDPA, we have known that digital technology has led to a lot of concerns with respect to privacy and data protection. And the government had been working on it, but it took a lot of time to build consensus or even like even a majority opinion for the government to say that all right, now in this version we can finally release it to the public and this is the version that we want to enact. So on one hand the government is playing catch up in a lot of, I mean, any regulator, I mean, and it's not just unique to India. On the other hand, if you're looking at very fast regulation, that can sometimes be like a knee jerk reaction, and a knee jerk reaction is also just as harmful because there will be gaps. There could be an overreaction to things which may not need so much regulation or prohibition. It leads to a lot of uncertainty for everybody involved because you never know when the next knee jerk reaction will come. So it's quite tricky for the state to intervene at any given point, but I don't think it's being debated that the state should not intervene. I think the question then is, until the state intervenes, what should be done? Because if let's say the Digital India Act or whatever AI regulations we have, if they are 2 years, 3 years away, should we just wait should we just wait and watch and not regulate AI at all? I think the answer there needs to come from the market because uh, the market is the one which is determining the pace at which AI is developed and adopted. So the market has good visibility on what are the economics associated with AI, what are the risks associated with AI, and they are the ones who are actually investing in AI's development, deciding the direction in which AI develops. So at this point, I feel it's imperative that the market, uh, you know, engages in building trust with consumers, with all kinds of stakeholders overall. Markets, the industry really needs to take it on itself to regulate itself so that from the very beginning, there is trust about what AI can do. Because at this point, if you're just going to exploit AI like anything and disregard everything else, there will not be any trust in AI, and that consumer trust that you should gain initially, I think that will be a great opportunity which is lost. So from both ways, because of the delay that is inevitable when it comes to regulation, and to build their own customer base, I think right now it's need for the industry. There's a need for the industry to self-regulate and self-circum, like basically do some introspection on how to go about things.
As you said, that the government has made it clear that the state is going to intervene, and that's what Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Minister of State, METI, said, that India will definitely regulate AI as any other emerging technology, and it will be regulated through the prism of user harm, so that no harm is inflicted upon the digital nagriks. Now, I have several related questions. First of all, what kind of harms can an emerging technology such as AI inflict upon users? Secondly, is it possible for the legislation to define the scope of that harm, because the technology is still developing, right? Still evolving. And to what extent can legislation be a effective tool to prevent emerging technologies from inflicting harm upon the users?
Right. Okay. So I think those are quite a few difficult questions, but I'll just try to answer them in the best way possible. So when it comes to the kind of harm that AI can pose, I think that is necessarily a product of what the use case of the AI is. Because if you're talking about something like an autonomous vehicle versus generative AI, you will not have the same kind of harms from both, right? Because on one hand, it's about physical safety, safety of pedestrians on the roads, uh, and how robust the mechanism of an autonomous vehicle is. On the other hand, when it comes to generative AI, it's a lot more about whether you can trust the output, whether that output uh, poses any kinds of harm, such as hate speech or insults to like grave insults to religion or something like that. So how harm is defined will have to be in the context of the use case of that particular AI, right? And the government has already tried to define user harm, I think, in some instances. For example, the DPDPA talks about any detriment to children while processing children data. So there is a lot of confusion on how can or what kind of data processing will actually lead to detriment to children, because there are some examples which are very easy to guess, like if you're profiling children and you're pushing some kinds of products towards them, that's not like that is a detriment. But there are many other cases where you don't know if it can be considered as a detriment because it's a very subjective exercise. And when it comes to, let's say, physical harm or financial harm, in these cases it's much more easier to define what exactly is user harm. Because physical harm, sure, somebody gets injured, somebody's property gets destroyed, it's one of the easier types of harm which to define and to perhaps regulate. Even with respect to financial harm, we know that there is I mean, based on popular perspectives, there is investment in stocks on one end of the spectrum, there's investment in crypto assets on the other side of the spectrum, depending on what is the risk appetite or what is the amount of harm that one can subject themselves to. So when it comes to these kinds of harms, I think it will be easier to define and easier to regulate. But the more complex types of harm are mental harms and I think reputational harms, because for example, deep fakes. As of now, deep fakes, we know that there has been some content created which is actually showing actresses or celebrities or actors in an insulting manner, in a derogatory manner, without their permission. But then, does that mean that any kind of deep fake is harmful? Because we also have AR Rahman, for example, taking permission from like singers' families, singers who are now deceased, taking permission from their families to make songs for a particular movie, ensuring that everybody's compensated. And so in that case, it's not like deepfake in itself is causing harm, right? Or it's causing a harm to reputation. So all of these questions also need to be considered. And I think mental harm is probably the most complicated here, because uh, how do you know if a particular AI is causing depression? If, let's say, there's a game like Candy Crush, for example, which is very addictive. Now, is that addictive behavior of users, is that actually a harm? So it's not easy to define, honestly. And the other option probably is to have a very broad language in the legislation saying that no user harm will be allowed. But then this is where either the executive will have to step in with rules, or it will have to be courts which have to interpret what exactly is user harm. So I don't think it's a very simple exercise, or there's any fixed parameter like that. uh, yeah, I think that's all I can say about that.
Should India take a principle-based approach in regulating AI, or should it take a more outcome-based approach?
Right. So I think when it comes to a prescriptive approach, or an outcome-based approach, I think that's going to be very challenging for AI, because, as we discussed, it's very fast-paced, it's very dynamic. We don't know, what kind of technology or what kind of use cases are brewing out there, because I think generative AI in that sense is a great example, because uh, in 2021, mid 2022, even we did not even know, or at least a lot of us did not even know that generative AI is a real possibility and what its capabilities are. But I think end of 2022 and throughout 2023, generative AI just became this huge factor. I think it was one of the most searched and researched topics on the internet. So many people started using generative AI, and a bunch of use cases have come up. So when we are dealing with something which is so fast moving, I don't think it's possible for the regulator to actually try and make an exhaustive list of what needs to be done, or what is prohibited, or what kind of compliances there should be. So in that case, a principle-based approach makes a lot more sense. And I think the IPC, or the Indian Penal Code, which was enacted in 1860, I think that's a superb example of how a principle-based approach can be, how it can actually stand the test of time. Because of course the IPC also has some prescriptive provisions, but overall the thing is that even after it's been, I think, around 150 160 years since the IPC was enacted, and the BNS came in, the government did not actually overhaul the entire IPC with uh, changing every single provision. It has been more of an updation exercise, where penalties have been updated, some things were decriminalized, some things you just added some language to make it more relevant to current times. But it's not like the entire thing had to be destroyed and then rebuilt again. I think the Telegraph Act is also, or at least was also, a good example of that, because even that was an old legislation which continued for more than 100 years. Uh, but the challenge with the principle based approach, I think, is that the legislature can only do so much. And those principles, when you actually think about it, uh, you can't regulate everything. So, again, I think, as we discussed in the previous question as well, what this means is that either the executive has to come in, they have to draft rules, they have to draft regulations, and the other option is that the judiciary has to step in and interpret all of these provisions as and when these come up. But both of these are, at the end of the day, they are not democratically elected bodies, and from that perspective it can be quite a challenge. uh, yeah, I don't have an answer on what is better. I just think that a prescriptive approach is more likely to fail than a principle based approach. Perhaps there's a totally new approach out there which will which will help us.
There has been a lot of buzz around the Digital India Act, which is said to have provisions regarding the regulation of AI as well. How hopeful are you with the upcoming act? And do you think should India be taking cues from the rest of the world or for AI legislation, or should it write its own trajectory?
Right. So I don't think there is a lot of things to take inspiration from outside of India as well, because all of this is very new. Uh, the EU has recently finalized its own AI legislation, but even that is pending negotiations, and I'm sure there will be a lot of fine tuning there. And despite all of that, we will not know, at least for a few years, whether or not it's a successful legislation. We can only see the legislation and try to predict that, okay, this seems like a good idea, and these are some principles that we can adopt. Uh, so there's very limited experience out there. The Digital India Act, now there have been some suggestions on what it contains. Now, I think with respect to emerging technology, what the Digital India Act does is it prohibits emerging tech which has a significant chance of leading to user harm, or which affects sovereignty, security, defense of India, public order, things like that. So there are two, three factors that the government has recognized, that if an emerging tech has a likelihood of causing these harms, then that emerging tech needs to be prohibited, or it needs to follow some more compliance requirements and so on. Of course, these are just things that have been reported. We still haven't seen an official version of the Digital India Act. But what I do feel hopeful about is that there is movement towards regulating. It's not the case that there are no conversations, there are no consultations. I think that's a very important part. And when it comes to international laws, I mean, not international laws necessarily, but laws of other jurisdictions, uh, I think just like how AI is trained based on a lot of data, I think regulations for AI also need to be trained, or they need to be trained on a lot of data, because jurisdictions which are coming up with new laws, they should be sharing on a constant basis with all other countries what kind of experiences they are having, what kind of challenges they are facing, what kind of successes they are having. Because unless we have that information, and unless we are collecting that information, analyzing that information, and then adapting that information, it's going to be a huge task. We still struggle with a lot of things when it comes to the internet and the cyberspace. And uh, of course, that, because it's now an older phenomenon, a lot of countries now understand how to regulate it, despite accepting the challenges that are there. So I think that just needs to be scaled up massively for AI, because the rate at which the technology is developing, I think uh, it's going to be very challenging if countries or governments, regulators don't come together to you know ensure that there's proper regulation, which not only stops user harm, but also ensures that innovation is not stifled at the end of the day.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Aniruddha.
It was a pleasure, and thanks again for inviting me.